I went to dinner with friends from work and saw my wife with her lover at the next table. I walked over to them with my heart in tatters, my throat burning with the urge to scream, but I kept the posture I still had left in me and, with the strongest voice I could find in that abyss that had opened up beneath my feet, I told her that I hoped she believed she had made the right choice, but that she should not look for me anymore. Then I walked away before the tears gave me away, leaving behind the muffled sound of the fork falling on the plate, her empty gaze and the frightened expression of the man who occupied the place that until yesterday had been mine. I left the restaurant feeling every step like a knife, every breath like it was burning my lungs, wondering when our love had started to die, trying to remember the last, "I love you," that didn't sound automatic, the last true smile, the last night I felt like it was just the two of us against the world, but everything seemed so distant that it hurt. As if that woman in front of me was just a stranger wearing the skin of the person that I swore to love forever, and in that whirlwind of emotions. I decided that I couldn't drown in that pain, that it wouldn't be that betrayal that would define who I am. I looked for a lawyer, started the divorce and tried to pick up the pieces of myself, but as much as I wanted to be strong, there were nights when the silence in the house was so deafening that it drove me crazy. Every corner of the room reminded me of her, every smell, every sound, as if the ghost of who we were insisted on haunting me every dawn, until, on a morning as ordinary as it was cruel, I heard the doorbell ring insistently. I opened the door and there she was, with her eyes red from crying so much, begging for a second chance, saying that she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that she could no longer breathe knowing that I was not by her side, that her lover was nothing more than an empty reflection of what she thought she wanted, but that now, feeling my absence, she understood how much I was everything she had always sought, and at that moment life put me before a choice that I never thought I would have to make do, because in her eyes I saw regret, but in my heart there was no more room for her, and even so, with every word that came out of her mouth, with every tear that ran down her face, something inside me twisted, as if one part wanted to run to hug her and another wanted to scream that it was too late. Anger and longing intertwined like snakes inside me, and for a few seconds I felt like I could give in, that we could start over, that everything could go back to the way it was before. But then I realized that the betrayal wasn't just about her sharing the bed, it was about having killed the trust, about having torn out the foundation that supported our home, and while she said between sobs that she would do anything to have another chance, I remembered the nights I cried alone, the early mornings when I looked for answers on the ceiling of our bedroom, the mornings when I stared at my reflection in the mirror asking what I did wrong, and I understood that nothing she said would change what had been broken, that it was no longer about guilt, but about choices, that it was no longer about what she wanted, but about what I deserved, and then I took a deep breath, looked at her with a serenity that I didn't even know I had, and said that I forgave her, but that she needed to move on with someone else, because I was no longer hers. Because now there was another woman who rekindled in me what I thought was dead, who reminded me that love doesn't have to be pain, that affection doesn't have to come after tears, that loyalty is not a gift, but a duty. And as the words left my mouth I saw the world crumble in her eyes, the understanding that she had lost not only her husband, but the man who had always loved her above all else. I saw the despair turn into silence, the plea turn into resignation, and I felt the weight of each memory of us turn into memories that were mine alone, because from that moment on I no longer belonged to the past, but to a future that no longer included her. And it was when I closed the door that I realized how cruel love can be when it is treated like a game, how much words spoken in the heat of passion can destroy homes, and how much the lack of dialogue, care, and respect can transform stories that had everything to be eternal into pages stained with regret. But even so, as I took a deep breath, I couldn't help but wonder, how could someone who seemed to love so much choose to hurt like that? And what would have happened if that night I hadn't decided to have dinner with friends, if I had arrived home without knowing anything? Would we still be living a lie? Would my heart continue to be a prisoner of an illusion, or would destiny have found another way to show me that not all love is forever? Welcome to the channel. We do not support and will never support any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional and exist to show how infidelity destroys lives, tears hearts apart and leaves deep scars on those we love the most. Get ready now for a shocking, intense, and emotional story. Sit back, take a deep breath and be ready to dive into a drama that will keep you hooked until the very last second. Enjoy the story. The breeze that night seemed to carry with it all the promises that had once been made, but there was still a strange calm in the air as Noah parked his car in front of the restaurant lit by yellowish lamps that flickered as if whispering ancient stories. He adjusted the collar of his shirt and sighed before getting out of the car, because for him that night was not just another commitment, it was the chance to show his co-workers that, despite the weight he had been carrying in silence, he was still the confident and secure man that everyone admired. Noah had built a respectable career in a multinational company. He was known for his professionalism and his ability to keep his head held high even in the most challenging moments, and that, for him, was more than just a reputation, it was a reflection of his fight to protect everything he loved. His marriage to Olivia was, until then, the most solid pillar of his life. Ever since they met on a college trip, when he bumped into her while rushing to a lecture, it seemed like fate had decided to bring together two hearts so different but equally passionate about the idea of sharing life. Olivia, with her charming smile and a sensitivity that made any room gain color, was a visual artist and transformed into paintings the feelings she could not put into words, enchanting everyone with her unique way of seeing the world. In the early years of their marriage, they built an almost magical routine, where each dawn was celebrated with coffee on the porch and promises of better days. While Noah left early to face the corporate jungle, Olivia spent her mornings painting in the sunlight, transforming the walls of her studio into explosions of vibrant colors that told stories of hope and passion. At night, when he returned tired, he was greeted by the aroma of the dishes she learned to cook just to see him smile, and with each laugh shared at the dinner table, they reinforced the certainty that they belonged together. On the weekends, when commitments allowed, they would get in the car and head off without a specific destination, discovering small coffee shops, craft fairs and hidden corners that became just theirs, keeping memories that seemed eternal. Those moments were living proof that even in the midst of routine, the love they felt was as alive as the first kiss exchanged under the summer rain that forever marked the beginning of the story they were so proud to tell. The relationship between Noah and Olivia seemed unbeatable, even to the most skeptical eyes. Friends and family saw them as the perfect couple, the kind of couple who exchanged silent glances and understood what the other needed without having to say a word. For them, the years had brought not only maturity, but a partnership that withstood the challenges imposed by time. Olivia always said that the way he made her feel safe was something that no painting could capture. Noah, on the other hand, even with the constant pressure at work, made sure to set aside time to surprise her with flowers for no special occasion, unexpected outings, and messages that reminded her how much she was the woman of his life. The complicity they had built seemed unshakable, and even when small disagreements arose, like when Noah arrived late or Olivia got lost in her own insecurities, they both had the ability to talk things through until everything was resolved before resentment set in. The house they chose together reflected the balance they believed they had: comfortable, bright, filled with objects that told their story, such as framed travel photos on the walls, gifts exchanged over the years, and Olivia's paintings scattered throughout the rooms. Every detail seemed to remind them of how happy they had been building that life, and perhaps it was precisely this sense of fulfillment that, for many, made their relationship an inspiration. Noah loved to watch Olivia as she painted, admired the way she lost track of time when she was focused on her brushes, and always said that the sparkle in her eyes was what gave him the strength to endure the pressures of the office. Olivia, in turn, felt her heart warm every time he showed up unexpectedly at the studio, even if it was just to give her a quick kiss before returning to work, a gesture that meant more to her than any expensive gift. Despite the routine they both maintained, there was a tacit promise between them that love would be their priority. During their nightly conversations, lying side by side, they exchanged dreams about the future. She wanted to exhibit her work in renowned galleries, he thought about giving up some of his responsibilities to have more time with her and, who knows, have children who would inherit her passion for art and his sense of justice. With each plan, they felt closer, as if nothing could separate them. The displays of affection were constant and spontaneous, a note in Noah's pocket wishing them a good morning, a coffee delivered by him to bed on lazy mornings, long hugs that made time stand still. To anyone looking from the outside, it was hard to imagine that anything could shake their relationship, because the delicacy with which they cared for each other seemed to be the glue that held them together. Still, over the last few months, Noah had begun to notice subtle changes in Olivia's behavior. Short silences that lasted longer than usual, distant glances that he couldn't decipher, and increasingly frequent excuses for not accompanying him to events that she used to love. He tried to convince himself that it was all due to the stress they were both facing, since she was determined to finish her most ambitious collection and he was immersed in negotiations that could solidify his position in the company. Despite everything, Noah remained attentive, offered unrestricted support and even suggested that she take a few days off to relax, but Olivia always responded with a forced smile, saying that she needed to focus on her projects. These answers, which would have seemed natural before, began to sound like curtains hiding something he couldn't see. Even so, he insisted on believing in the strength of what they had built, telling himself that everything would go back to normal and that their love would overcome any difficult phase. In calm moments, when they were together in the kitchen preparing something special, there was still laughter, there were still soft kisses and improvised candlelit dinners, but now these moments were accompanied by a twinge of anxiety that Noah could not explain. Olivia, in turn, alternated between giving herself completely to those moments and seeming to get lost in thoughts that took her away from him, leaving him confused and restless. Close friends began to notice the difference, but whenever they asked, Noah said that he was just tired, that everything was fine, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. After all, how could everything be different if until recently they had made plans to travel to celebrate their next wedding anniversary on a paradise beach? The following weeks brought even more signs that something had changed. Olivia started sleeping later, saying she had to finish pending work, while Noah went to bed earlier, exhausted from endless meetings. Touching each other became rare, and the hugs that used to last long enough to feel each other's heartbeat were now brief, almost formal. When they finally lay down together, silence filled the space that had previously been filled with light conversations about movies, music, or plans for the weekend. The atmosphere that had once been one of comfort and intimacy now became increasingly heavy, as if something was hanging over them that neither of them had the courage to name. During that time, Noah began to notice how the details that used to bring him joy became triggers for silent anguish: Olivia's perfume permeating the bed linens, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house, the ringing of her cell phone that made her rush to answer it. Every little detail became a constant reminder that something was out of place. Even so, he refused to confront her, preferring to keep alive the hope that everything would resolve itself, that those clouds forming on the horizon would soon dissipate, and the sun would shine for them again as before. There were nights when, upon feeling the warmth of her body next to him, he would close his eyes tightly, as if to hold on to that feeling of belonging forever, afraid that when he opened them he would discover that it was all nothing more than a memory. Meanwhile, Olivia immersed herself more and more in her universe of colors and brushes, but something in her expression revealed that art was no longer enough to calm the turmoil that was forming in her mind. She spent hours in the studio, painting frantically, as if she were searching for answers in the canvas that she could not find within herself. Sometimes, silent tears would run down her face, staining the paint palette, but she would quickly wipe them away and start over, trying to smother the guilt and fear that were beginning to take over her. Deep down, she knew that something needed to change, but she could not find the strength to face the reality that she had helped to build. Despite all the shadows that were beginning to spread over their relationship, there were still moments when Noah and Olivia managed to reconnect. One Saturday afternoon, while they were making a cake together that used to be their favorite recipe, they laughed when they got dirty with flour, exchanged sweet kisses and danced in the kitchen like they had done in the first months of their marriage. That moment seemed so perfect that Noah truly believed that they could reclaim what they were missing, and Olivia, for a brief moment, let herself be carried away by nostalgia, forgetting everything that was afflicting her. But when the music stopped and silence returned, they both realized that their happiness was as fragile as the flame of a candle about to go out. That same night, while Olivia was taking a shower, Noah found a necklace in one of the bedroom drawers that he didn't remember buying for her. He picked it up and, for a moment, felt his heart tighten, but he quickly pushed away the bad thoughts and told himself that maybe it was just a gift from her to herself. After all, she always liked unexpected treats. She put the necklace away again, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that insisted on growing inside her. When she saw her come out of the bathroom with wet hair and flushed skin, he smiled and pulled her close, seeking in the warmth of her embrace the confirmation that everything was okay. But even as their bodies met, there was an invisible coldness that separated them, and neither of them knew how to break that barrier. And so the days went by, with ups and downs, kisses that sometimes burned with desire, sometimes were as cold as the wind that invaded the house during the early hours of the morning, while both desperately clung to the memories of what they had once been, without realizing that each gesture, each prolonged silence, each averted glance was like one more brick in the wall that was being built between them, preparing the ground for a storm that no one would be able to contain. The sound of the clock ticking away seemed louder than ever that night when Noah decided to go out to dinner with his colleagues from the company, an invitation he almost refused because he preferred to go home and try once again to find in Olivia's words the hope that there was still salvation for what he felt was slipping through his fingers. However, driven by the need to distract himself and not dive even deeper into his own uncertainties, he accepted the invitation and headed to the restaurant where the team would celebrate the closing of an important contract. As he walked to the door of the place, he mentally repeated encouraging phrases to keep anxiety from overcoming him. He knew he needed to show his friends that he was still strong, because the man who had always been confident could not give in so easily to the winds that threatened to knock him down. As soon as he entered the room, he was greeted by warm hugs, excited smiles, and the cozy sound of cutlery and laughter that filled the room with a sense of life, almost enough to drown out the melancholy that insisted on following him like a shadow. The conversation at the table flowed surprisingly lightly, and Noah began to relax as he exchanged jokes with his colleagues, feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was finding himself again. There was something liberating about the way everyone seemed to have forgotten their daily worries, toasting small successes and sharing funny stories about eccentric clients and endless meetings. He allowed himself to smile sincerely, something he hadn't done in a long time, and for a few minutes he almost believed that everything could go back to the way it was before, that when he got home he would find Olivia waiting for him with her face lit up with the same glow that had enchanted him since their first meeting. However, the lightness of that moment was abruptly interrupted when, as he turned his head to call the waiter, his eyes caught a sight that made his stomach drop as if it had been thrown off a cliff. There, at the next table, under the soft light that made the atmosphere even more intimate, was Olivia, elegantly dressed, her hands clasped with those of a man Noah had never seen before. Her smile, so familiar, seemed to shine only for this stranger, and the way they exchanged knowing glances made it clear that this was no simple dinner between friends or colleagues. For a moment, Noah felt the world around him dissolve into a dull hum, as if he were submerged in a nightmare from which he could not wake up. He tried to process what he saw, but each of their movements was like a knife in his chest, the muffled laughter, the disguised touches, and the way she fixed her hair with a delicacy that he knew so well, because he had seen that same scene repeated so many times when it was still for him that Olivia reserved those gestures. With his heart beating so hard it felt like it was about to rip his ribs apart, Noah stood up without even realizing it. His colleagues watched him in surprise, but he simply walked steadily to the table where his wife and the man were. Every meter he walked seemed to increase the weight on his legs, as if he were walking on quicksand, but nothing could stop him. When he arrived, Olivia saw him and the smile on her face instantly faded, turning into a panic that he couldn't hide. Her lover, surprised, let go of her hand and shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but it was Olivia's expression, a mix of guilt and fear, that made Noah's blood run cold. He took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that seemed to have exploded into 1,000 pieces inside his mind, and with a calm he didn't know existed in himself, he said the sentence that would echo in the memory of everyone there. He hoped she believed she had made the right choice, but that she wouldn't look for him anymore. The silence that fell over the restaurant was so profound that Noah felt as if even the background music had stopped. His colleagues at the other table, now silent, watched him, not knowing how to react. Olivia opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out, only tears began to stream down her face while her lover looked away, as if he wanted to disappear. Noah turned around, feeling his legs weaken, but he kept his posture and walked back to where he had left his coat. Each step seemed to echo like thunder, while in his mind flashed all the memories that now seemed to be fading, the lazy afternoons on the couch, the improvised dinners, the nights when they had fallen asleep in each other's arms after promising that nothing would ever separate them. He gathered his things, ignoring the curious and shocked looks around him, and left the restaurant without looking back, as if every inch of distance he put between them was a release from the emotional prison he had unwittingly gotten himself into. When he got to the car, he rested his hands on the steering wheel and let the tears he had been holding back finally flow, wetting his cheeks while his chest burned as if it were on fire. He tried to understand how everything had gotten to this point. Where were the signs he had missed, the clues he had ignored, or the words he had failed to say that could have perhaps prevented it from happening? He remembered the small silences, the apologies that made no sense, the hugs that had become shorter and the kisses that no longer had the same urgency, everything now fit together like pieces of a cruel puzzle that revealed the image of betrayal. He swallowed his tears with difficulty, knowing that he needed to be strong, that he could not let that pain define his life from then on. He started the car and drove aimlessly through the empty streets, while the streetlights streaked the darkness like silent ghosts. That same night, Olivia returned home hours later, her face swollen and her eyes bloodshot. The once welcoming home now felt cold, silent, oppressive. Every object in the room seemed to accuse her, every photo on the wall a reminder of what she had destroyed. She walked to her bedroom, found the bed impeccably made but empty, and collapsed onto it, burying her face in the pillow as sobs racked her body. She didn't know if he would come back, didn't know if there was anything she could do to make it right, but for the first time in a long time she felt the real weight of her choices, as if the mask she had worn for herself had fallen away and revealed the monster she had become. Amidst her tears, she remembered every look Noah gave her, the way he had always treated her with love, patience and dedication, the man who sacrificed nights of sleep to help her carry heavy canvases to exhibitions, who memorized important dates to fill her with small gestures that made her feel special, and the pain of realizing that all of this was now in the past seemed unbearable. Meanwhile, Noah wandered through the dark streets of the city, not knowing where to go, but unable to return home. He passed places they used to visit together, restaurants, coffee shops and even the square where they shared their first kiss, each memory acting like salt in an open wound. He parked near a deserted park and stood there, watching the moon reflected in the lake, thinking about how everything could have been different if there had been more dialogue, more courage to face the problems they had both been avoiding. In his mind, Olivia's words during the happy moments still echoed, promises of eternal love, of companionship until their last breath, all now stained by the brutal reality that was imposing itself. He knew he needed to make decisions, but his heart was still in pieces, and anger mixed with longing in such a confusing way that it was almost suffocating. The next morning, Noah returned home to the sunrise, painting the sky with orange hues that, in another time, would have filled his chest with hope. He found Olivia sitting in the living room, her hands shaking, holding a cup of coffee that was growing cold without her noticing. The silence between them was so heavy that it seemed to fill the entire room, and when their eyes met, there were no words, only the mutual understanding that nothing would be the same again. She stood up to try to hug him, but he instinctively stepped back, and her movement froze in the air, as if time had stopped. Noah went upstairs without saying a word, grabbed some clothes and personal items, and went back down again, passing Olivia without being able to look at her once more. Before leaving, he took a deep breath, turned around only to say that he needed time, that he couldn't look at her without seeing everything that had happened, and left, letting the door close behind him with a dry sound that sounded like the end of a chapter. Checking into a small hotel near his office, Noah felt the loneliness like a blow to the stomach, but at the same time he knew he needed that space to reorganize his thoughts and feelings. The next few hours were filled with memories that tumbled over one another, their wedding day, the vows whispered with tears of happiness, the awkward dances in the living room, the plans to have children and grow old together, all now part of a past that would never return. He asked himself over and over where he went wrong, what he could have done differently, but he found no answers, only the throbbing pain of betrayal that corroded every good memory. And so, as the day wore on and the sun began to set, he knew that soon he would have to face even more painful truths, because the story he thought he had written with love was preparing to reveal secrets capable of changing everything forever. Noah returned home on a late afternoon filled with gray tones that seemed to reflect exactly the weight he felt in his chest. Each step towards the front door sounded like a warning that there was no more room for escape, that the time had come to face everything head-on, and he needed to find the strength in what was left of himself to face the last words that still needed to be said. When he opened the door, he found Olivia sitting on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap and her eyes swollen from crying so much. Her face seemed paler than ever, as if guilt was consuming her insides with every second of silence that passed. When she saw him, she stood up on impulse, hesitated when trying to get closer and stepped back as if she feared he would disappear if she dared to touch him, tears already overflowing before a word was even said. Noah calmly closed the door behind him, watched her in silence for a few seconds that seemed like hours, then took a deep breath and said that they needed to talk, that there was no way to put it off any longer, as there were things that needed to be clarified if they wanted to move on with their lives, even if on separate paths. Olivia approached slowly, her voice barely audible as she said that she never imagined that this could happen, that what began as a moment of weakness turned into a devastating mistake, that every day away from him made her realize more clearly the abyss she had dug with her own hands. She tried to explain that she felt alone, that the pressure of her insecurities pushed her to make thoughtless decisions, but Noah raised his hand, asking for silence, because he needed to speak before any excuse could be used as a shield for the truth that they both knew existed. He said that for a long time he believed that the love they had would be enough to overcome any storm, but that at that moment, what hurt the most was realizing that she didn't even trust him enough to share her anguish, that she preferred to seek comfort in arms that weren't his instead of fighting for what they had built together. Olivia cried uncontrollably, her trembling hands raising to her face as if to hide, but Noah kept his voice firm, although his eyes revealed the whirlwind of emotions that consumed him. When his voice returned, it seemed to carry the weight of all the sleepless nights, all the unanswered questions, all the days he tried to make sense of what he felt slipping through his fingers like sand. He said that since he left home, he had spent sleepless nights reliving every detail of their relationship, trying to understand when they lost their way, but that he had also found within himself the strength to admit that he deserved something better, someone who would share his pain, who would be honest even in the worst moments, who would love him loyally. Olivia shook her head, sobbing disjointed words that tried to deny what she was hearing, but with each sentence he said, it was as if her defenses were shattering into 1,000 pieces. Noah looked at her deeply and told her that there was something she needed to know, something that made any chance of reconciliation impossible, something he could no longer keep to himself. Olivia looked up slowly, her breath coming in short gasps, and asked what could be worse than what they had already experienced, what could be even more devastating than the pain they were feeling there. It was then that Noah, with a low voice and his gaze fixed on her, revealed that, since he had moved away, he had met someone who had brought him peace like he had not felt in a long time, someone who had listened to him without judgment, who had made him remember who he was, who had given him back the feeling of being loved completely. He said that he had not planned for it to happen, but that, when he opened his heart to talk about everything he felt, he had found in another woman not only understanding, but a connection so genuine that it made him realize that there was no more room for Olivia in his heart. Olivia took a step back, as if she had been hit in the chest, the expression of disbelief taking over her face, her lips trembling without being able to form words, her eyes wide as if they were still trying to process what they were hearing. Noah continued, his voice calm but pained, explaining that he had not sought revenge or superficial consolation, that everything had happened unexpectedly when a coworker, who had always shown true friendship, offered only company and attention in a moment of despair, and that from that friendship something was born that he never wanted to give up. He confessed that he had discovered feelings that he believed were dead, that, with this woman, he reminded himself daily that love does not have to be painful, that affection does not have to be earned with sacrifice, that loyalty is natural when you truly love. Olivia, between sobs and hands on her chest, asked how he could say that, how he could have allowed someone else to occupy the space that had always been hers, and Noah replied that it was not a decision, but a consequence, that while she chose to betray, he chose to survive, that while she destroyed everything in silence, he desperately sought reasons to believe that there was still an us, until he realized that he needed to save himself. She tried to get closer, begging him to give her a second chance, that together they could rebuild everything, that they could start from scratch, but Noah shook his head slowly, his tears finally overflowing, but his voice remained firm, saying that it was no longer possible, that forgiving her only meant freeing her to move on, but that he could no longer be by her side, because her heart had found another path. Olivia fell to her knees, repeating that she still loved him, that she would do anything to prove that she could be the woman he deserved, but Noah bent down, held her face gently between his hands and said that he loved her too, but that this love had changed, that now it was a love that wanted to see her at peace, but far from him, that he wanted her to find the strength to rebuild herself, but not to wait for him, because he no longer belonged in that home. The sound of Olivia's sobs echoed through the room, mixing with Noah's own sighs as he stood up, picked up the bag he had packed before going downstairs for their conversation, and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned to her one last time, his teary eyes reflecting the pain he still carried, and said that he hoped that one day she would understand that his forgiveness was genuine, but that, for him, their love had ended the moment she chose to betray him, and that there was no way to erase that choice. Olivia reached out to him, but the distance between them seemed insurmountable, and when the door closed, the sound echoed through the house like thunder, reverberating off the walls that still held the memories of promises that had not withstood the test of time or wrong choices. Outside, Noah breathed in the cold night air, feeling the breeze cut his face as warm tears ran silently. In his chest, a mixture of relief and sadness crashed like violent waves, but there was also the certainty that, despite all the pain, he had finally closed a chapter that had kept him trapped, that the freedom to move on was now real. Inside the house, Olivia cried, hugging herself, while the echo of his last words resonated in her mind like a punishment that would stay with her for a long time, knowing that she had lost not only the man she loved, but also the chance to live the life they had dreamed of together. And so, their story reached a point of no return, where love and pain, intertwined like flames and ashes, left only space for what was to come, in a future that promised to be as unpredictable as the storm that separated them. Noah walked along the wet sidewalk, each step echoing in the silence of the night that seemed to swallow all sounds, the streetlights forming distorted reflections in the puddles of water as he tried to reorganize the ideas that danced chaotically in his mind. The cold wind cut his face like small blades, but he moved forward, almost without realizing where he was going, as if the need to move was greater than any destination. As he turned the corner, he noticed a small cafe still open, its fogged windows revealing silhouettes of people seeking refuge from the world outside. Driven by a sudden urge to sit down and breathe, he pushed open the door, was greeted by the warm aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the soft sound of old music, and chose a table in a corner, from where he could observe without being seen. The atmosphere was cozy, with rustic furniture and lamps that projected dancing shadows across the walls, and for a moment, Noah felt like he was in a place outside of time, where he could gather the pieces of his soul without the weight of familiar gazes. As she absently stirred the cup in front of her, the door to the cafe opened and, to her surprise, Olivia walked in, her eyes still red and her face lined with lines of exhaustion. She met his gaze immediately, as if a magnet were drawing them together, and hesitated before walking to her table. When she approached, Noah stared at her silently, and she asked to sit down with an almost imperceptible gesture, as if she were afraid of the answer. He nodded slowly, and she sat down in front of him, leaning her elbows on the table, her hands clasped together as she searched for the right words. Olivia said she couldn't stay home knowing he was out there, that she needed to see him one more time, that she needed to say everything her pride had kept silent for so long. Noah watched her closely, without interrupting, but his face showed that each word she said hurt more than it healed, because the wound was still bleeding inside, even if on the outside he tried to remain calm. She began to talk about the fears that consumed her, about how his success made her feel small, how the constant comparison between her achievements led her to believe that he could find someone better at any moment. She revealed insecurities that she had kept since before their marriage, feelings that she had never had the courage to expose and that had accumulated until they became monstrous enough to push her into an irreversible mistake. Olivia explained that, even when she smiled at him, there was an emptiness that devoured her inside, and that when she let herself be carried away by someone else, it was not because she loved him any less, but because she could no longer deal with the fear of losing him. Noah, with his eyes fixed on hers, said in a low voice that all he wished was that he had listened to her sooner, that he would have done anything to help her overcome these ghosts, but that now, all of that sounded like a story told too late. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she confessed that she still loved him with all her strength, that every moment since discovering his betrayal had been a never-ending punishment, that his silence was more painful than any harsh words. Noah pressed his lips together, controlling the urge to explode with everything he felt, and replied that he had also felt small, incapable, fragile, that he had questioned his worth as a man when he realized she had chosen someone else to fill the space that should have been just theirs. He said he could not forget the image of her smiling at another man, the intimacy they had shared with someone who had no right to it, that memory appeared in his dreams like a recurring nightmare, but that as much as it hurt, he had to admit that it was the end of the story they had written together. Olivia reached across the table, but Noah did not move, and her hands remained suspended in the air for an eternal second before slowly withdrawing. At that moment, a waitress approached and asked if they would like anything else, and the brief interruption made them both realize how exposed they were, as if the world outside had stopped to observe them. Olivia took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and said that, even though she knew she didn't deserve it, she wanted to ask him not to hate her, to at least keep the good memories of what they had lived, because, despite everything, those memories were the only thing that made her endure these days now. Noah lowered his gaze, stirred his now cold coffee, and replied that he would never hate her, because hating her would mean hating an important part of who he was, that he preferred to keep the happy memories as proof that the love they had had was real, but that now he needed to move on with someone else who made him feel alive again. The statement silenced Olivia so deeply that she seemed to shrink in her chair, her eyes fixed on nothing as she absorbed the weight of the reality that Noah had just stated. Olivia asked if he had introduced this new woman to anyone close to him, as if asking for details could ease the pain, and Noah answered honestly that he hadn't yet, that he was taking it slow because he didn't want to make the same mistakes, but that for the first time in a long time he felt that there was a possibility of building something real. He explained that he didn't want to replace memories, but to build new ones, with more solid foundations, and that he had learned from what they had experienced that love is not about suffocating, but about liberating. His words resounded in her heart like hammer blows, and Olivia leaned forward, saying that she regretted it more than anything, that every step she took away from him led her to a deeper abyss, and that the worst part was knowing that she couldn't go back, that there was no way back for someone who had destroyed her own home. Noah watched her as she spoke, seeing in her face the pain he had been searching for to confirm that what they had experienced was not a farce, that there had been love, but that there had also been flaws that could no longer be ignored. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, he took her hand and held it tightly, saying that he truly forgave her, not so that they could start over, but so that they could both live without the chains of hurt that bound them to the past. Olivia burst into silent tears, tears falling onto their clasped hands, while Noah kept his gaze steady, as if he needed to see through to the end what that conversation could heal. They remained like that for minutes that seemed like years, until, exhausted, they let go of their hands and leaned back in their chairs, understanding without needing any more words that there ended the last link that united them. The waitress returned with the bill, discreetly leaving it on the table, and Noah took out his wallet to pay, while Olivia just watched him, as if recording his every move for the last time. When they got up, they walked together to the door of the cafe, side by side, but without touching each other again, and when they reached the sidewalk, they stopped in front of each other under the dim light of the street lamp that illuminated only half of their faces. Noah said that he wanted her to find the peace she deserved, that it didn't need to be with anyone, but with herself, that he hoped she would forgive herself as much as he forgave her, because only then would she be able to rebuild her life. Olivia, in a hoarse voice, replied that she also wanted him to be happy, that his new wife knew what an incredible man he was, that she would take care of him as she should have, and that, above all, she wanted him to never stop believing in love. A car approached, and Noah waved to the driver, who stopped next to them, the taxi illuminating Olivia's face with headlights that made her tears shine like crystals. Noah opened the door, but before getting in, he turned to her one last time, looked into her eyes as if saying goodbye to a piece of himself, and said that despite everything, he was grateful for the good times they had shared, that each one of them had made him stronger and more prepared for what was to come. Olivia smiled through her tears, a sad but sincere smile, and whispered an almost imperceptible, "Bye." Noah got into the taxi, and as the car drove away, she stood on the sidewalk, hugging herself, watching the taillights fade away until they disappeared into the night, as if that red beam was the final flame of what they had once called us. The drive to the hotel was silent, Noah watching the city pass by the windows like an old movie, memories blending with the lights that streaked through the darkness. When he got out of the car, he thanked the driver and went up to his room, where he sat on the bed and took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in a long time that he had closed a cycle. He called the woman who was now occupying his thoughts, told her he needed to see her, and she replied that she missed him too, that she would wait for him with a smile and a warm hug. Hearing this, Noah felt his heart beat differently, no longer heavy with pain, but light as if he had found the will to move forward again. He got up, grabbed his coat and went out again, leaving behind the empty room, the silent walls and everything that no longer made sense to carry. The night, cold and silent, now seemed full of possibilities, as if each star in the sky reminded him that, even after storms, it is still possible to find the light to guide new paths. Noah left the hotel with the scent of longing still clinging to his clothes, walking through the streets as the city slowly woke up, the sky turning blue in hues that seemed to promise new beginnings, but there was still a silence in his heart that echoed like a memory of what he had just experienced. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last, because even though he had freed himself and Olivia from the past, he carried the dilemma of what it meant to move on when there were still such deep scars on his chest. He arrived at the coffee shop where he had agreed to meet the one who, in the last few months, had brightened his days with gentle words and affectionate gestures that seemed to have the power to restore what he thought he had lost forever. The door opened with the discreet sound of the bell, and there she was, sitting at a table near the window, with the smile he had learned to expect even on the grayest days. Noah's heart beat faster, but mixed with the joy there was a twinge of fear. Would it be right to involve someone else when he still carried such fresh scars? He approached her, and before he could even sit down, she stood up to hug him, a hug that seemed to say without words that he had a safe haven there. They sat down, exchanged long glances, and she asked how he was, her voice full of care, as if she feared that any movement could hurt him even more. Noah explained that the previous night had been difficult, that he had found Olivia, that they had said everything that needed to be said, but that even so, the feeling of being lost in the world, without roots, was greater than he could have imagined. She held his hand firmly, looking at him with an intensity that made him feel truly seen, and told him that there was no need to rush, that her love was patient, that she would be there while he discovered each part of himself that needed healing. Noah felt his eyes fill with tears, not with sadness, but with gratitude, because for the first time in a long time he felt that he didn't have to carry everything alone, that he could be vulnerable without fear of being judged or abandoned. As they talked, the cafe gradually filled up, but for them the world seemed restricted to that space where they only existed for each other. Noah talked about his fears, about how he was afraid of repeating mistakes, about the fear that the past would turn him into someone incapable of trusting again. She listened attentively, without interrupting, only squeezing his hand from time to time as if to say, "I'm here." When she finally responded, she said that there was no true love without risks, that trust is not born ready, but is built little by little, and that if you were willing to face the ghosts together, you could find something even more beautiful than what each of you had experienced separately. Noah smiled, a shy but genuine smile, realizing that he was in front of someone who understood the complexity of his dilemma, who did not see him as a broken man, but as someone who still had a lot to offer. After leaving the cafe, they walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, their hands intertwined as if seeking to warm each other not only from the cold that cut through the morning, but from the fear that still insisted on haunting their hearts. They stopped at a square where children ran after pigeons and couples shared benches wrapped in improvised blankets, and there, sitting side by side, they shared silences that were not uncomfortable, but full of meaning, as if each beat of their heart said more than any sentence. Noah confessed that he still felt guilty for having allowed himself to love again so soon, for fear that people would judge the fact that he was rebuilding his life as weakness, but she made him see that there was no manual for mourning a relationship, that each person feels and overcomes it in their own way, and that what mattered was not time, but the truth of feelings. As the morning wore on, Noah realized that he needed to go home to take care of some pending matters, the divorce papers that were waiting for his signature, the belongings that still needed to be sorted out, but above all, the need to definitively close chapters that could not remain open. They said goodbye with a soft, tender kiss, and he promised that he would come back to look for her as soon as he had finished everything that needed to be resolved. On the way home, Noah's head was a whirlwind of thoughts. He remembered every word exchanged with Olivia, every tear that had fallen during the night, but also the hopeful smile of the woman who now occupied his thoughts and who, somehow, managed to make him believe that it was possible to start over without carrying the weight of the past forever. When he got home, he found the living room organized in an almost artificial way, as if Olivia had spent hours arranging every object in the hope that the external order would reflect some semblance of control over the internal chaos that consumed her. She wasn't there, but there was a note on the table, in shaky handwriting that he recognized from afar, saying that she needed to move away, that she was going to spend some time with her family to try to get herself together, that she couldn't stand living in the space that had once been home and was now just a constant reminder of everything she had lost. Noah read each word slowly, absorbing the weight of each sentence, but also feeling that there was a decision there that could free not only her, but him as well. He knew that by allowing Olivia to move on from there, he would give them both the opportunity to heal wounds that would never heal if they remained stuck in the same routine of pain. In the days that followed, Noah devoted himself to sorting out everything that was left of the marriage. He gathered documents, closed joint accounts, separated objects that they had bought together and that would now have different destinations. Each item he handled carried with it a memory, as if the history of each small detail needed to be revisited before it was finally left behind. There were dishes they had chosen together on trips, souvenirs from birthdays, paintings painted by Olivia that still decorated the walls, and even clothes that carried the scent of happy afternoons, but Noah was meticulous in putting everything that belonged to her in separate boxes, not as a form of resentment, but as a silent ritual of closure. When he was finished, he sat in the now nearly empty living room, listening to the echo of his own footsteps as if it were the sound of a new beginning. During this period, his encounters with his new wife became a beacon of light in the darkness that still surrounded him. Each conversation with her was like a balm, each touch a reminder that there was a future. But along with the hope, a moral dilemma also arose that consumed him. Noah wondered if it would be fair for her to start something so profound while she was still processing the end of such a significant relationship. He was afraid of transferring insecurities, he was afraid of hurting her with ghosts that were not hers. He shared his concerns one night when they met in a park lit only by moonlight, and she, with the serenity that enchanted him, replied that loving someone means helping them carry their bags, that no one enters a relationship completely unscathed, but that the difference lies in who decides to walk alongside them even knowing the risks. Those words stuck in Noah's mind for the next few days, as he finalized his divorce, handed over the keys to his old house, and found a new apartment where he could start over without the suffocating memories that haunted him at every turn. On his first day in his new home, he sat on the bare floor, staring out the window at the city lit up at night, feeling a mix of fear and excitement, as if he were about to jump off a cliff, but knowing that on the other side there could be something incredible waiting for him. He picked up his phone and texted her, saying he wanted her to see his new place, that he wanted them to make memories together there, not to replace the old ones, but to write a story just for them, and when she replied saying she would run over, Noah felt a warmth fill his chest, as if he could finally breathe without feeling pain. While he waited, Noah reflected on everything he had experienced, the wrong choices, the prolonged silences, the unspoken words, the lies that eroded trust, but also the discoveries, the truths that set him free, the gestures of compassion that appeared when he least expected it. He realized that the pain had not made him weaker, but more aware of what he needed to be happy, more attentive to what it means to truly love and willing to fight to build something new without repeating old mistakes. When he heard the doorbell, he got up with his heart racing, and when he opened the door, he found in it the smile that now meant everything, feeling that the path to the future might be uncertain, but that for the first time in a long time, he was no longer alone to walk it. Noah opened the door with his hands still shaking with anxiety, and as soon as he saw her standing in front of him, he felt as if all the air had returned to his lungs after weeks of breathing only fragments. She entered, bringing with her the soft scent of flowers that always seemed to accompany her, the sound of her shoes echoing in the almost empty apartment like soft notes of a song that only they could hear. She walked slowly towards him, her hands touching his face as if to make sure it wasn't a dream, and told him in a low but firm voice that she was proud of everything he had done, that she had followed every step of the way and that she admired him for facing the pain head-on, for choosing the hardest path when it would have been so much easier to hide in resentment. Noah hugged her tightly, a hug that seemed to want to merge two hearts that had spent too much time bleeding alone, and there, in the silence of that new home, they realized that they didn't need furniture or decoration to feel like they were already building something together. They sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, their legs intertwined as they shared confidences that they had previously been afraid to reveal. He told her about the days when he would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like he was still trapped in a nightmare, about the fear of never being able to trust anyone again, about the regret of not having noticed signs that could have prevented so much pain. She calmly replied that everyone carries scars and that the most important thing is not to erase them, but to learn to live with them as reminders of what they do not want to repeat, as proof that they survived and still have a lot of love to give. Noah smiled with relief, a smile that lit up his face in a way that he himself no longer remembered how it was, and said that he felt like someone who had finally found ground after adrift for so long. As the hours passed, the sunset light tinted the sky with orange hues that invaded the apartment through the large, curtainless windows, casting dancing shadows that followed their every move. They talked about their fears, about dreams that were just beginning to take shape, about their desire to see new places, and about how good it would be to build routines that belonged only to them, without comparisons to what they had already experienced. She told stories about her childhood, about how she learned early on not to expect perfection from anyone, and Noah listened to each word as if they were secrets revealed only to him, feeling that the trust she offered was more valuable than any gift. Every now and then, they exchanged unhurried kisses, kisses that carried the intensity of someone who understands that there is nothing left to prove, only to live. At one point, Noah stood up, offered her his hand to accompany him to the small balcony, and together they watched the city that lit up with night lights, as if each bright spot were a new possibility. She rested her head on his shoulder and said that she had never met anyone with so much courage to face their own pain, and he replied that if there was one thing he had learned from everything they had experienced, it was that courage is not about not being afraid, but rather moving forward in spite of it. Between smiles and knowing looks, they shared silences that needed no words, because each other's presence filled every space, healing wounds that time alone would never be able to heal. When the wind grew colder, they went back inside and improvised a picnic on the living room floor, sharing fruit, bread, and wine while they laughed at embarrassing memories and made plans for the next day. Later, as they lay side by side, Noah held her face and asked if she was afraid of what they were building, if she wasn't afraid that one day he would get lost in memories that were no longer part of them. She replied that fear is part of those who truly love, but that love only blossoms when people decide to face risks together, that no matter what happened, she wanted to be by his side to start over as many times as necessary. Her words enveloped him like a warm embrace, and he felt every doubt begin to dissipate, every shadow of the past lose strength in the face of the light he found in her eyes. There, lying on the floor of the apartment that still smelled of fresh paint, they made promises that didn't need to be said out loud, but that vibrated to the rhythm of their hearts. The following days were filled with trips to furniture stores, discussions about wall colors, and laughter in supermarkets as they chose groceries to fill the fridge for the first time. Each small task of daily life became a celebration of the present, a way to definitively bury the ghosts that insisted on haunting them. Noah found himself smiling at random moments, like when she tied her hair while cooking or when she sang out of tune while tidying up the boxes scattered around the living room, and he realized that these details, so simple, were exactly what he was looking for, the authenticity of someone who didn't need to hide or apologize for being who they were. At night, they talked until late about everything and nothing, about fears they didn't have the courage to share with anyone else, about the future that they now imagined not as a distant dream, but as a path that was beginning to be walked step by step. One afternoon, while they were organizing books on a makeshift bookshelf, Noah's cell phone vibrated with an unexpected message from Olivia, saying that she had decided to move permanently to another state, that she needed to start a new life away from everything that reminded her of what she had lost, and that she was grateful for the forgiveness he had offered her, because without it she would never have had the strength to move on. Noah read the message in silence, feeling a pang of melancholy at the realization that that chapter was finally ending, but also an immense peace at knowing that they could both truly start over without being chained to the past. When she asked if everything was okay, he showed her the message and said that he felt lighter, as if a part of him that was still trapped had finally been freed, and she hugged him tightly, as if she understood the depth of what he had just experienced. In the days that followed, small conflicts began to arise, like any couple who learns to live with each other's differences. disagreements about schedules, opposing opinions about movies, differences about what was a priority in household chores. But unlike before, Noah felt that now there was room to talk, to express feelings without fear, to apologize when necessary and to listen without turning everything into a war. She patiently reminded him that they didn't need to prove themselves perfect, that what made them strong was precisely their willingness to solve problems together, and each reconciliation made them more united, more certain that, despite the challenges, they were on the right path. With each argument overcome, Noah learned a little more about himself, about his own limitations, and felt that he was finally becoming the man he always wanted to be. On a rainy night, sitting on the couch while the storm drummed on the windows, they talked about the scars they both carried from past relationships, about how painful experiences shaped their expectations, and discovered that they shared a fear of losing each other, but also a desire to build something different. Noah confided that for a long time he had associated love with pain, that he thought that to truly love you had to accept suffering, and she, her eyes shining even in the dim light, said that love is about caring, about choosing every day to stay even when things get difficult, but without giving up respect and dignity. The conversation went on into the early hours of the morning, alternating between tears, smiles and long silences, and when sleep finally overcame them, they fell asleep hugging each other with the feeling that, despite the storms, they had found shelter in each other. Noah began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was more attentive, more present, more aware of his words and actions. He noticed things he had previously ignored, such as the emotions behind a look, the tone of voice that said more than the words, the signs of tiredness or sadness that needed immediate attention. These details made him realize that love also means learning every day, that a relationship is not something static, but a living organism that needs constant care. In each gesture of hers, in each word of encouragement, he felt driven to be better, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to give back what he received. At the same time, he began to invest more in himself, returning to hobbies he had abandoned, reconnecting with friends who had drifted away during the turbulent years, rediscovering who he was when he was not defined solely by the relationship that ended. One sunny morning, they decided to visit a park where Noah used to walk to gather his thoughts on the darkest days. They walked hand in hand along the flower-filled paths, stopped to watch children playing, old couples smiling, and street performers spreading music through the air, and realized how life went on, regardless of the pain that seemed so unbearable when they were stuck in it. They sat on a wooden bench under a tree, sharing memories that had once hurt but could now be seen as part of a story that had brought them there. Noah held her hands tightly and said that he felt that every step, every mistake, every tear had prepared him for that moment, and that for the first time in a long time, he no longer felt fear of tomorrow, but curiosity and gratitude for everything they could still experience together. Noah's life seemed to have settled into a new rhythm, as if time, once an enemy, now worked in his favor, gently pushing him towards days that, even without major events, were marked by the serenity of someone who finds peace after so much chaos. Each morning was greeted with gratitude, and each night with the feeling that nothing needed to be fixed, only lived. The relationship that had been born from a sincere friendship blossomed in a way that was as intense as it was unexpected. Weekends became filled with short trips, afternoons of movies, and laughter that echoed throughout the apartment, while the weeks brought the complicity of two hearts that had learned to love without fear. Noah found the meaning he had been searching for in the little things, making coffee for her, decorating the room with improvised flowers, sharing readings in the evening light. All of this reminded him that happiness does not lie in grand gestures, but in the sum of seemingly banal moments that, together, build something indestructible. While Noah reinvented himself, Olivia experienced a more brutal loneliness than she ever imagined. After moving away, she tried to start over in another city, but the memories of what she had destroyed followed her like shadows that stretched across every street she walked. Amidst her regret, she tried to rebuild her professional life, investing in exhibitions of her work in an attempt to find purpose, but the coldness of crowded galleries contrasted painfully with the warmth she once felt at home, with those who loved her unconditionally. Each professional success came with an emptiness that no amount of applause could fill, and each night of silence in her apartment reminded her that she had exchanged the only certainty she had for a fragile and treacherous fantasy. The conversations she tried to start with acquaintances always stopped when the subject turned to family or relationships, because inside her the wound still bled, exposing a guilt that she would never be able to completely wash away. Noah, in turn, was rediscovering himself day after day, learning to feel pleasure in things that he previously considered too small to deserve attention, like taking care of plants, cooking recipes he saw on the internet, or simply spending hours lying on the couch, entwined with the one he loved, while they exchanged confidences. With each achievement, with each spontaneous smile, he felt that the pain finally stopped dictating who he was, and the freedom to love again, without fear, transformed him into someone more whole. When he met up with old friends, everyone noticed his lighter gaze, his more confident posture, and even those who knew the details of the story smiled with satisfaction at seeing that, despite everything, he had not allowed himself to harden or lose faith in love. On a special night, celebrating a year of relationship with the person who gave him back hope, Noah prepared a dinner lit only by candles, with soft music playing as a soft soundtrack to smiles and looks that said more than any speech. In the middle of the meal, he held her hands and said that he never believed it was possible to feel so alive again, that everything they had been through together, from the initial insecurities to the most recent achievements, made him certain that he needed nothing more than what they had built side by side. She, moved, replied that she had never met anyone so dedicated to starting over without letting the pain of the past steal the beauty of the present, and there, in the heat of that moment, they realized that life had given them a second chance that many would never experience. Meanwhile, Olivia watched her own life become increasingly lonely. The night seemed to drag on in silence, even though everything seemed to be in order on the outside. She tried to start new relationships, but each attempt ended when, deep down, she realized that she was looking for traces of Noah in them, that no hug had the same warmth and no look the same sincerity. Regret became her most faithful companion, visiting her every night, cruelly reminding her that impulsive choices can cost a lifetime of happiness. One morning, sitting in front of her computer, Olivia wrote a long letter to Noah, not to ask him to come back, but to thank him for having loved her so intensely and to tell him that, even though she didn't deserve it, he would always be her greatest example of true love. She kept the letter without the courage to send it, but when she wrote it, she understood that she needed to find the strength to forgive herself, because moving on didn't mean erasing the past, but learning to live with the marks it left. For Noah, the days that followed the first year with his new partner were marked by small and big victories, the feeling of security when walking down the street hand in hand, the pleasure of planning trips to places he had always dreamed of visiting, the ease of no longer having to justify every absence or every change in mood. Over time, they built a routine that was not perfect, but it was theirs, full of complicity, frank conversations and laughter that filled any void that might arise. Noah finally understood that true love does not require unnecessary sacrifices or force anyone to abandon who they are, but rather, it makes each person grow, blossom and feel whole. Little by little, the memory of what he experienced with Olivia stopped causing pain and became just part of a story that, as bitter as it may have been, served as a bridge to the best chapter of his life. On a spring afternoon, walking through a park where families were having picnics and children were running among the trees, Noah stopped, looked at the person next to him and said that if there was one thing he had learned from everything he had experienced, it was that love needs to be nurtured every day, that trusting the other person and yourself is what keeps any relationship alive, and that no one deserves to live trapped in distrust that slowly kills everything that could be beautiful. He received a smile full of tenderness in response and, in that moment, he felt more connected to life than he had ever felt before. On the other side, Olivia, in her new city, sat on a lonely bench at dusk, watching couples pass by and, even though she knew that her choices had led her to that point, she tried to find solace in the possibility of one day being able to rebuild something real, even if it would never be the same as what she once had. Each character followed different paths, but they all carried with them the lessons that came from the choices they made. Noah discovered that forgiving doesn't mean going back to the past, but rather freeing yourself from it, that true love is knowing when to insist and when to let go of the hand of someone who no longer wants to walk with you. Olivia learned, in the most painful way, that cheating doesn't just destroy the other person, but also herself, leaving scars that not even time can completely erase. And the new woman in Noah's life became living proof that love can be reborn stronger when found at the right time, with the right person, even if it takes storms to get there. Now we want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, tell us if you have ever experienced something similar or how you felt as you watched each moment of this emotional drama. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow other impactful stories like this one, with plots that touch the soul and make us reflect on our choices. Remember, betrayal destroys not only relationships, but also dreams, homes, bonds that are often impossible to rebuild. Therefore, value those you love, take care of what you have built together, because trust, once broken, rarely goes back to the way it was before. Our channel does not support any type of betrayal, because we believe that respect and loyalty are the pillars of any true relationship.